So good afternoon or evening. It could be evening where you are now. My name's Jason Cobine, and I've been working in the insurance industry for 30 odd years now, since 1989. And over the last 10 years, probably more than that, we've been talking to people a lot about digital protection, which is something that people are more interested in now than they ever were. So with that in mind, we've got an expert with us today who we're going to discuss digital with. Cristian is an absolute expert in system architecture. So Cristian, would you like to introduce yourself and tell people a bit more about what you do?
Yep. Hello, my name is Cristian. I'm a cybersecurity architect expert and a business founder. I'm working in the industry for over a decade on various roles. I have been in my previous role a technical architect, and now I'm a cybersecurity architect.
Excellent. So cybersecurity is the general scenario that we deal with on a daily basis. Now, people often hear about the hard luck stories in the press, but there are a lot more things that you don't hear about, and those are usually from companies who are insured. So it doesn't get out in public that they've had an issue. However, three things I want you to remember at the end of this or in 3 days' time. First thing is that holistic protection is what a business needs, especially a business with a board, because the board members need to show that they've looked at all the different pieces of the jigsaw. The second thing is cyber insurance is about services. It's not a traditional insurance where you have an issue, say there's some fire damage, you have to repair things, you have to get contractors in, and then afterwards the insurers settle the bills. Cyber insurance is about services that help people who are having a digital problem. And the third thing we want you to remember is the independence of your advisors is critical, because you don't want people recommending services or applications or software or insurance that isn't actually a good fit for you. You want people who are independent of all vendors, they're vendor agnostic, and they can give you the best advice that actually fits what you need, what you demand, and what's going to make you feel better and work better. So having said that, I think we should move on to ask Cristian about his independence, because I do believe, Cristian, that you are agnostic. You wouldn't recommend one tool above another unless it was actually appropriate. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, it is a fair statement. So we've choose our business to go completely agnostic, mainly because behind every solutions that we've seen in the past, done through my experience, it was a level of bias. I wouldn't be completely biased about it, but it was a level of it involved, because businesses in general today, they do have and I don't want to be wrong about it. It is natural to be that way for businesses to be to not be vendor agnostic, because the way it's working, they do get some benefits from it, and they are very interested to get those benefits. However, that influence the decisions that they make during providing solutions to their customers. So if somebody is a, let's say, Cisco client, they will recommend Cisco for their clients. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope that was clear enough. I don't want to be very.
Right, it makes sense. So, there are people who are recommending products because they're a major part of their business. I understand that. But you're holistic, which is fantastic. You're agnostic, which is fantastic. But in terms of what you do, which is systems architecture, I mean, let's start with how important is it? I know it's quite technical, so we're probably not going to get into any technical stuff here today. That's for people to discuss with you individually. Yet, how important is the technical aspect and the cybersecurity aspect of architecture?
For businesses, it is critical, because every time they change an MSP, for example, and they have a need for a change in the system, it doesn't necessarily have to be critical change, but they often end up having a critical change for a complete system change because that company that gives them the advice, they do advise to have a complete change in the system. And that is coming back to being biased because they are a partner with that vendor. For us, we're trying to implement everything as it is in the current system. We're trying to improve the current system. We try to harden the current system. And if the system is not capable to withstand the current challenges, then we go further and see, okay, how can we improve your system and change the system in becoming better?
Okay.
We don't try to go. We don't have a sales target. That is what we're trying to guarantee for the clients. That
Sure.
every solutions we provide to them is not biased.
No, fantastic. So let's move bias out of the way. That's clear. And, we're independent as well. So we applaud people who are sector agnostic and who are vendor agnostic because they're able to give quite a broad range of advice. So that's fantastic, Cristian. So, okay, so it's pretty critical that you get the right technical and cyber security architecture because otherwise, when you change provider, you mentioned managed service provider, you might have to change everything, which doesn't sound like a great idea. But what it does sound like is if there is a systems architect like you involved, it's going to be more holistic. Have I got that right? It's going to incorporate everything rather than just the bits a managed service provider might do.
Yes. So architecture in general, despite the fact it's technical or cybersecurity architecture, it has to take in accounting every aspect of the business that it is technical and non-technical, but interacts with the technical part.
Okay, so that means literally everything is taken into account. Well, that's fantastic because that means you can inform the board about the whole thing. It's not just going to be the IT people. It means what you're doing will inform the board about, where the finance functions might need some support or where the marketing people might be sailing a bit close to the wind. So overall, that sounds to me like it's going to reduce risk.
Yes, there is a principle in architecture which is called interoperability. And this one is very important to understand how an action that you take in a certain part of the business is going to affect the overall business.
Okay.
And that is critical for us to understand in order to produce an effective architecture.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's just a pinpoint solution that is going to leave gaps behind.
Sure.
Leaving gaps behind, it has two main downsides. First of all, your infrastructure is not going to be operated effectively. So you're going to lose money by not operating your infrastructure correctly. Second of all, if we speak about cybersecurity, then there are gaps that cyber threats can exploit.
Sure. Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And whilst I like the word interoperability, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. So I'm also going to use the phrase that we like to use is the law of unintended consequences. So people often talk to us because they changed one insurance and they didn't realize how that affected the other insurance. So that's why we recommend people look at insurance holistically so that they don't miss something. But if you're doing all the things that you just mentioned and you're looking after how one thing fits with the other, then sure, that must help with like compliance and regulations and meeting all the standards. I mean, GDPR is old news now, but there's always going to be data requirements and also standards in contracts with clients. So is this going to help with compliance?
Compliance is a big part in architecture. So everything that we do in terms of architecture, it is overlaps with compliance in a form of a shape. It doesn't really matter at the minute which one or which one compliance we're chasing. So all these compliance, they are just frameworks that they overlap and complete each other.
Yes.
In areas where they leave gaps behind. So for example, if you are compliant with NIST, you're about 80% compliant with ISO 2701.
Sure. Okay. So it's not, you can make pretty quick progress with an ISO if you've already got something else, which is fantastic. Yes. So, but I know a little bit about NIST. I'm not the expert, and I know a little bit about ISO. And what I have found is businesses that do take on these standards, we find that they suffer less when they have a problem. They're less affected by something that comes out of the blue, they have more resilience. It's better, it's easier for their business to continue what it was doing. Have you found that yourself when they actually invest in taking on these standards?
Absolutely, because these frameworks that they want to adopt, these standards, they also look at the overall business, and they look at every aspect in the business and also one of them, which is very important, is resilience and how the business can withstand certain events in the business, negative events in the business, not necessarily being cybersecurity. It can be just operational events. For example, a business, it's running at its full capacity and the server goes down.
At all times. This is the thing. What we try and explain to people, businesses are running at full capacity at all times. Then a server goes down.
Yes, absolutely. A server goes down. That's not a cybersecurity incident. That's a technical incident. So that's an operational problem. So if the business is prepared, then the other servers, they're going to take up the load and the business is going to run smoothly till they're going to fix the problem. If the architecture is not in place and they just have pinpoint solutions, when the server goes down, the business goes down. Okay. And then they have a major problem to, reorganize the services and operate.
That moves on to another area that I wanted to get into, which is, how a well-designed architecture can impact a business. You've just mentioned about operational efficiency. You're not going to have the challenges if you've looked at it holistically as if you'd looked at it on a pinpoint. So that's fantastic. But a few minutes ago, you also mentioned that something would be more cost efficient. So it's sounding like getting the architecture right, there's cost efficiencies too. Am I on the right track?
Yes. So the cost efficiency, it's more like a long term in architecture. It's not quite a short game. And I understand many businesses, they don't look very often at this because they think it's quite expensive, which can be, but not necessarily. It doesn't have a high return of investment, which is not true.
That's debatable. Yep.
Yes. And also people want immediate results, which they are not happen immediately. So to give a bigger frame of the architecture is best seen when the business is at stress. When it's on idle and everything works fine, people don't see much and they don't see the need of investing in this so much. But when the business is at stress and the system goes down, or they are under attack, or they have a very high demand at some point, let's say, for an example, a business that deals with events. So when an event is happening, a lot more traffic they will generate towards their website or whatever.
Absolutely.
That is the moment when a good architecture would shine. That is the moment when they're going to see the benefit of this investment.
So it's a bit like, for me, the best insurance is one that you have it, but you don't need it. But when you need it, it operates at really efficiently, really quickly, really well. Those are the best types of deals when you get things that are not necessarily visible, but my God, when the crap hits the fan, suddenly they fall into action and they're really reliable.
Yes. So a good architecture also supposed to have a stress test for their environments. It doesn't happen very often, unfortunately, but it should be there. So
yeah, I think stress tests are great. I mean, we talk to people about risk assessments. Now, risk assessments are like a paper-based stress test where you're just discussing, okay, if this scenario unfolds, what happens? And you're talking about assessing not just the likelihood and the probability, but the actual impact of what happens. And when you actually do that, it goes down so well with the insurance people. I mean, any cyber application where we can actually address the risk of a business continuity failure has been addressed and there are things in place, we get a much better hearing from the people in the insurance companies, because they like the fact that people have invested some time and effort in actually working out what they might need in their business, what might happen, what might go wrong, what they need when it's going wrong. Because they see so many applications where people just say, oh, my business is standard, it's the same as everyone else's. But then when you look at their websites and their marketing, it says, our business is nothing like anyone else's. It's totally unique, which is why you need to use us. So this assessment and this able to prove that you've got things in place really does help. But it also moves on because there's two types of proof. There's the proof that you've done things well. And as you said, good systems architecture, it shines when things are going wrong. But what about when things are going wrong? So, what is there like we call it crisis management, but some people call it incident response planning. So
Yes.
is any of that part of the systems architecture?
Yes, and it's more related to the cybersecurity architecture rather than technical architecture. The incident response plan is quite critical for a business. Even though the incident response plan doesn't have to be very technical, very complicated. Let's say there is a small business that doesn't have many assets, that they still need one. And I will explain you in a short moment why. Even though that one has 2 lines and says, John, if something happens, take the phone and call Bob. That is sufficient. It's empowering a person to be responsible for the incident.
Yeah.
And this is the very first step and very important step in the business, because you don't want to have a business where an incident is happening and they pass the responsibility from one department to another and the time is passing. Time is absolutely crucial when an incident is happening.
Yeah.
You are against the clock to respond, and you have not only your business to protect in that time, you also have responsibilities to report this incident for example, the ICO, the Information Commissioner's officers, they need to be informed within 72 hours of an incident.
No, absolutely.
So from that moment when you have discovered you have a problem, somebody has to be responsible and own the incident. That's the only way you can effectively mitigate that problem.
I think, yeah, it makes sense. And we see people that do and people that don't. And the people that do, there's less disruption. And you're one of the first people that's ever agreed with me on how simple a plan can be. Because if you've got insurance, for example, a lot of our clients' incident response plan, one of the first things on it is call Cobine Carmelson.
Because that can be
it's
as simple
part
as
of it, isn't it? And there could be just 3 or 4 calls to make, but then the people who receive those calls, they then have their own part to play. And
yes,
when you've got all these things in place, your incident response plan, for example, that might need you to do things such as find out from a lawyer if we need to tell the information commissioner about this. Well, if one of your things is call Cobine Carmelson, who then put you in touch with the insurer, they provide a lawyer. So people should be too worried about putting plans together, because they will isolate what you need and make it clear, but you don't necessarily have to provide those things, because you'll find if you've got a cyber incident, the insurance companies throw loads of experts at you to try and solve it as soon as possible. Including a communication strategy like the PR to tell all the right people all the right things. But I remember when we spoke before this, you mentioned that communication is critical and it's sort of part of the cyber incident systems architecture. Is that a fact?
It is not necessarily part of the cybersecurity architecture, but communication has to be effective. So most of the companies that have been hacked in the recent years, they kind of employed somebody who is a professional negotiator. Okay. They have to have a form of communication with the criminal. Sure. Either if they are negotiating, either if they are buying time, I will suggest that they have a form of communication. The communication doesn't stop only there. There has to be an internal communication as well. How much is going down into each department for people to understand that they have to take a certain action, to understand that they are under an imminent attack, to understand, let's say that you are in a supply chain, how you communicate with your partners for business, how you communicate with the information commissioner officers, how we communicate. You have to have a strategy in place. Okay. So that is part of the architecture, but not only. So there are multiple departments involved.
So it sounds like when you do a systems architecture, you would be able to say when things happen, your incident response plan, is going to say you need these, and these, and communication would be one of those. But from what you've told me, all the things that might be necessary, in my experience, would all be paid for and provided by the cyber insurer. So you wouldn't have to go and find your own negotiator. You know, I know one insurer in particular has got 120 people on hand, ready and waiting. You know, they don't sit there doing nothing all day because they're pretty efficient, but they're helping different people with different things, but they're ready to react. But one thing that is pretty critical is after the event. You know, when the event has been sort of quietened down and things have been fixed, there is still some issues. There could still be issues with people who think they've been affected. So we call it like incident reporting. So you find out exactly what went wrong, and then you work out what's going to be different in the future. But these can be quite interesting documents. Is that part of what you do?
Yes, part of the architecture, it has to be a part of remediation. And after remediation, there is a part of improvement. Because we take the lessons learned from what happened in the past incident, and we try to mitigate them in the future so this event doesn't happen again. There are special teams that they do have sort of games. So there's a red team and the blue team that they play these kind of games. And there is in the middle another team that kind of locks between those two teams and takes the lessons learned and harden the systems to go further without having the same problems that they found within these games.
Sure. Okay. Well, that sounds like fun. Not that people.
It's not fun at all. So these teams are professional white hackers, if you want to call them that way, and professional defenders, and they fight against each other as a blue team and the red team. And there is somebody who sits in the middle and takes the events that happens in real time and makes a plan on how to make a report. That report is getting passed to us on how, and we take that report, we look at it and make a strategy on how can we improve based on the findings of these people.
Okay. Well, that sounds really interesting because insurers love that as well. You know, if people have found out what's gone wrong and they've got a pretty comprehensive report, the insurers are going to want to know anyway. So any form of reporting would be fantastic. Okay, so I think the sweet spot between us is if you provide someone with advice about system architecture, it could be that you're recommending services that the actual insurers provide when there's an issue. So sounds like that could be interesting when and if it happens. I think all parties are happy in that case. You know, if I think the issues about digital and data and cyber, I think they're a tripartite agreement. I think that the people that have to be involved are people in IT like yourself who know about security, the company, the business itself and its advisors like me, but also the insurers who aren't as, how can we put it, archaic as they used to be, especially on the digital stuff. They realize they're very proactive, and some of the conferences I've been to, especially about AI, have just blown me away. It's not the old, you know, men in suits peddling policies. It's really interesting, the services that they provide. So that's another conversation. And anyone who's watching this and is interested in either getting more holistic protection or being more resilient or finding out more about what Cristian does or what I do, then don't hesitate to get in touch. Anything else you want to put on the record, Cristian? Anything about systems architecture that we haven't, I mean, there's probably loads of technical stuff, but anything else that you want to mention?
One thing that I want to highlight to every customer, when they receive a solution from anybody, doesn't matter who it is, including from myself, don't just come and ask about that solution, just one person. Go and ask in the market.
Yeah.
You will hear a lot of different opinions, but it will help you to understand best what is better for your business.
Sure.
I might have my own opinion, somebody else might have their own opinion, but every customer that has returned to me has been an ideal customer.
Sure.
So I do recommend to everybody that when I give you an advice, don't just take my advice, go around the market, see what is available, wander a bit around, and when you're going to come back to me, we're going to have a proper conversation about it.
Okay, well, I love that because for me, it demonstrates confidence. You know what you're saying makes sense, and you're happy for people to talk about it at length. And I applaud that, because I think it's very important that people do get different alternatives.
Yes.
So whilst we're independent, and we might recommend certain cyber insurance or cyber security recommendations, for example, other people might have different ones, and it's absolutely fine to compare. A lot of the time we are comparing what people have offered with what we've got to offer, because clients ask us to do that. So I applaud going around the market and getting different options. Okay, well, we're coming to the conclusion. I want to thank you, Cristian, because I find what you do fascinating, and it's great to have someone who's a real expert in helping businesses become more resilient. I appreciate you're doing it from systems architecture, but overall, that's what businesses want. They want competitive advantage. They want to be more efficient. They want their cost base to be lower. They want more profit. And being resilient is one way of getting all those things to happen. So the 3 things we do want people to remember next week, I suppose, is holistic protection is what a company needs, especially if it's got a board. They have to demonstrate that they've ticked all the boxes, not just a tick box exercise, but all the different departments have been taken into account. Something that you may not have known before today, cyber insurance is not a traditional insurance. It's about services. It's not about you paying to fix things and then insurance companies repaying you. It's about insurers giving you access to people who will fix things. And independence, we've banged on about it a little bit, but Cristian's independent, I'm independent, and we're not saying you should use us, but whoever you do use, whether it's systems architecture, risk management, business continuity, or insurance, speak to people that are independent, and also get recommendations from other people like you, people with similar businesses or people similar outlooks. I don't think people recommend others unless they're sure they're going to do a good job. So any final comments, Cristian? Anything you want to mention?
That's everything from me today. Thank you very much for having me.
That's okay, my pleasure. It's always great. Expertise is hard to find these days, so it's great that we communicated. And thank you very much. I'll be in touch. And to all the viewers, there will be some ways to contact us both. Feel free, we're open for business, and we do look forward to hearing from you, and we're happy to answer any queries or questions. We know that this stuff can get complicated, and we're happy to try and make the grey areas black and white for you. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.